the 1990s were the best decade. Some would say it was the 60s, I say it's the 90s. So this is my deeply personal and highly subjective list of the top 25 albums of the 1990s. There are many like it, but this one is mine. Only one album per band is allowed, and I tried to stay away from too many underground bands because that would just complicate the list even further, but there are a couple hidden gems in there. I know that there are entire genres of music missing from this list, and there are even a lot of classic albums that music critics would consider to be the best that are also missing from this list. And to that, I gotta say, I haven't heard every album in the world. I'm just one guy and this is my personal list, so I tried my best. So if you have your own ideas or your own version of the top 25 albums of the 90s, let me know. Leave them down in the comments below.
Number 25.
A friend of mine had this CD back in the day and he was so proud because he had found it randomly. Nobody around us had listened to this kind of music or knew who this band was, and I admit I was a little jealous because I wish I had found this CD first. It's a really cool album. You could tell it was something special and it was really unusually good. For 1998, it was well ahead of its time, and just the title, The Shape of Punk to Come, it would sound really pretentious if it weren't totally right and somewhat prophetic. It earns a spot in the top 25 in terms of legacy and influence on the underground, as well as compositional structure, which would later define a whole genre.
Number 24.
One of the best bands to come out of the DC hardcore scene, Jawbox's self-titled album is their best album. A friend of mine always used to call this Jawbox. It sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? It is structurally a very consistent album from start to finish. Every song is good, every song is memorable, the hooks are smart, the songwriting is deep, and everything that Jawbox does well culminates on this album. For me, I had to put this on the top 25 just because how many good songs there are, the compositional structure of the songs, and the whole vibe of the band is awesome. Plus, they've had a great deal of personal influence on me.
Number 23.
One day, just randomly, I was thinking about fantasy names, and this one word popped into my head: estero. So I thought to myself, I wonder what this word is, I wonder where it came from, what does it mean, if it means anything at all. So I typed it into the internet, and what I found was this album. And oh my god, what an album. Considered one of the greatest and most influential trip-hop albums of all time. Produced by Doc McKinney, he would go on to produce another artist named Reese, R-E-S, who has a very similar style to this, so if you're a fan of this album, I recommend checking out Reese. But Estero and McKinney working together to produce Breathe From Another is pure magic. The vibe is totally sleek, totally cool.
Number 22.
Guarantee the things I like and care for. Ooh, do you care what you're like? I'd trade a lock of hair for. Ooh, you to care what I.
The day I discovered this album, everything I knew about songwriting was completely turned upside down. The chords were so dissonant, the timings were so weird, nothing made sense, and yet everything made sense because somehow the vocal melodies just pulled everything together. This is one of the weirdest albums you'll ever hear, for better or for worse. This album is definitely not for everyone. I used to blast this album every time I would give somebody a ride, and they'd either be really into it or they'd be kind of freaked out and be like, wow, you guys listen to some weird shit. Shudder to think Pony Express record makes it onto this list because of the nostalgia for me and the personal influence it's had on me, and for completely shattering all the rules that I thought I knew about music.
High scores, all their tears pour down. Heaven is holding up for high scores.
Number 21.
Some would argue that Demanufacture is Fear Factory's best album, and I can understand that. But for me, I gotta give it to Obsolete with one caveat. It needs the bonus tracks. If you take in this album as a whole, with the bonus tracks included, it becomes one of the greatest metal albums of all time. The guitar tone is perfect, and there is a slight hint of nu metal groove throughout the album, but most of it is that quintessential industrial metal sound. It is that sound paired with the production that paint the most vivid picture of a bleak world where man is fighting machine. I admit, when I was younger and I first got this album, it took a while to grow on me. But like I said, with the addition of the bonus tracks, every year I would listen to it, and every year it grew on me more and more. It got to the point where some of the tracks that I initially had thought were filler had revealed their musical depth to me upon repeated listens. It's been many years, and I finally come to understand how awesome this album is and how awesome the songwriting is.
Number 20.
You're spinning me around, my feet are off the ground. I don't know where I stand. Do you have to hold my hand? You mystify me, you mystify me, you mystify me.
One day, very randomly, I just had this craving for Cranberries. Specifically their singles like Linger and Dreams. I found this CD in the bargain bin and I picked it up just thinking, oh, I'm gonna listen to the singles and maybe a couple other tracks will be good. Didn't really expect much from it. And I was so surprised to find that when I listened to it, magically, every song was really good. It was just one of those albums, hook after hook, and the way the songs come after each other flow really well. And who doesn't have some kind of nostalgic memory with the song Linger? The vocals of Dolores O'Riordan were next level, just untouchable. Now, we all knew that the girl from the Cranberries had a really good singing voice. We knew that from the singles. But if you hear it in the context of the album, that's where it's really gonna hit you. Nobody sounds like her, nobody has her voice.
Spinning me around, my feet are off the ground. I don't know where I stand. Do you have to hold my hand? You mystify me, you mystify me, you mystify me.
Number 19.
Creator of the whale, king of wicked ways.
White Zombie is the best thing that Rob Zombie has ever done. You know, after he went solo, it was alright, but it was never the same. The actual band of White Zombie is really good, really tight, just really solid, a really solid band. And this album has one of my favorite guitar tones for metal of all time. Everybody knows the single More Human Than Human, but it's one of those cases where you don't know if the rest of the album is gonna be good or, you know, up to par with the singles. Well, it is good. Whatever you'd picture it to be, from the singles to the imagery to the horror references of the 60s and 70s, that's exactly what this album is, and it's awesome. By the way, More Human Than Human, best use of the slide guitar ever.
Number 18.
I stay up is like
Hot Topic had this on their listening section back in the day, and this is the first time I ever heard emo. So when I listened to it, I wasn't thinking that it was emo or that it came from a scene. I had no concept of any of that. I just listened to it and thought, man, every song is good, and they have this kind of sound in their band where they're always playing the notes that you want to hear. Like, it's as if they're always playing the good part. The production is really clean, the guitars are heavy when they need to be, and that outro track is really cool too. My friend used to fall asleep to that every night. It wasn't until much later that somebody actually told me about the genre known as emo. And for me, this album, Clarity, is the epitome of that sound. This album went on to influence a lot of pop artists as well, years later.
Number 17.
When I was a little kid, Stone Temple Pilots were too enigmatic for me to understand, too sophisticated for a stupid little kid like me to get into. Like, this is the kind of stuff that journalists from Rolling Stone listen to, so they're always referencing things that go way over my head. For some reason, this album was for rent at my local library, and I somewhat reluctantly checked it out, and it grew on me surprisingly quickly. The production and choice of guitar tone are so focused and so evocative of a very specific vibe. It was so referential and derivative of 60s and 70s pop culture, yet mixed with the 90s heaviness. And it was just so cool that I didn't care if I didn't understand. It made me want to understand. The previous Stone Temple Pilots albums are also really good, but they feel like they're coming from a grunge scene, whereas Tiny Music feels like it's coming from the art scene. It's like a purely alternative album, almost like an art piece.
Number 16.
Your
I know, you're probably thinking, what is this random gothic nu metal band doing on this list? Are they really that good? And I'm here to tell you, yes. Their first album really is that good. I didn't want to like this band for a long time. I rejected them initially because of their hit cover of Blue Monday. I thought it was lame, I didn't like it, but all of my friends would rave about the CD. Finally, somebody made a copy for me on cassette, and I ended up listening to it from start to finish, and I realized that I was wrong. The arrangements, the chords, the melodies, the sounds and textures all have a shocking amount of depth. It's almost like a freaky goth industrial metal version of David Bowie. For whatever reason, this is the perfect album to listen to if you're trying to get over a breakup or if you're hung up over some rejection. Listen to this album and it's gonna make you not give a crap.
You're just another pretty face in a room full of whores. No, you don't mean much. You used to be so naive.
Number 15.
When I first bought this CD, I was with my parents, so I had to stealthily take the CD jacket out and flip it backwards so that they couldn't see it. But I could play the actual CD in our car, no problem, because they couldn't understand the lyrics. This is the best Cannibal Corpse album. One of the first Cannibal Corpse albums where the production felt somewhat modern. But most importantly, all the songs are catchy and memorable. Every time you listen to it, you'll find new riffs and sections that you hadn't noticed before. Back in high school, none of my friends would touch this stuff. They all hated it. I was the only one that listened to death metal. My friends would tease me about listening to Cannibal Corpse, and one of my friends pointed out that the track list of this album is kind of like a chronological story. I Will Kill You, Disposal of the Body, Sentence to Burn, Blood-Drenched Execution.
Number 14.
People had been telling me for years that I would like My Bloody Valentine, and it took me a while, but I finally got around to downloading some of their songs off of the internet back in the day. And my first reaction was, something's wrong with these songs. Maybe the byte rate of the MP3 file is off, or something was wrong with the download, because these songs don't sound right. There's something janky about the sound quality. If you like shoegaze, then you like shoegaze. I'll admit, some of the songs are still a little hard for me to listen to, but on this album, you will find some of the most beautiful songs ever made, the coolest album cover ever, the coolest band name ever, and that feeling that you get when you hear Sometimes with the visual of a city at night.
Number 13.
I try to swim beneath. I try to keep the weight, but I can feel these narcolepsy.
conclusion of this album might be shocking to some of you out there. Isn't Third Eye Blind like poppy crap? It's not. It's really good. This album is really, really, really good. You may not believe me, but it's true. It's like a miracle. Every single song is catchy, well written, and just a solid all-round song. One of the most consistently good albums ever, which is why it's on this list. I have a lot of memories visiting my friend in college and driving around and listening to this. This is music for college students in the late 90s and early 2000s. Some of y'all might think that sounds lame and corny, but just think about how many singles came from this album. It's really amazing. If you don't know about this album, give it a chance.
Number 12.
Most people would not associate Slipknot with the 90s. But hey, this album came out in 99 and it is one of the best metal albums of all time. Slipknot today is arguably the biggest metal act in the whole world. Their concept was cool, the masks were cool, but most importantly of all, they backed it all up with some of the heaviest music ever made. They bridged together nu metal and death metal in a very nuanced and smooth way. It wasn't overtly death metal, but you could hear it in the approach to the guitar composition and the riffs. Also, Slipknot has one of the greatest drummers of all time, Joey Jordison. To somehow be both the coolest and the heaviest band in the scene is impressive and respectable.
Number 11.
This is one of the first albums that I ever listened to as a kid. One of my relatives had this CD, and for some reason I was really embarrassed to listen to it around my family, so I would just turn it down really low and put my ear up to the speaker because they didn't have headphones for some reason. I would read through the lyrics in the booklet and look through the album art, and the red and blue imagery just matched with the music so well. It really evoked a certain kind of feeling and emotion perfectly. Also, this album has the most beautiful intro ever made in the history of music, ever. I think Cure fans are torn between which album is their best, Disintegration or Wish. I fall into the Wish category, but maybe it's because it's from the 90s and I am a 90s person. It really is a quintessential 90s album. The production and songwriting just evoke the feeling of the 90s through and through.
Number 10.
Opens my mind to feelings. Can't face boredom without sun.
know, I was really torn going back and forth between self-titled album and Life is Peachy. And I know a lot of people would argue that the self-titled album is the best album by Korn. But I decided to go with Life is Peachy because this is a personal, subjective top list. It's the first Korn album that I ever owned, and it's one of the first metal albums that I ever owned. And it's got some of the best songs by Korn ever written, like Twist and Adidas. This is some of my most favorite production of all time, having both the heaviness and clarity of modern metal production with the grit and warmth of analog tape. Now, you could argue that self-titled songs are catchier, but I would argue that the songwriting on Life is Peachy is more evolved and deeper. Fun fact, the single No Place to Hide was actually nominated for a Grammy. My CD case proudly had a sticker saying Grammy nominee on it. Korn, really? A Grammy? That's kind of weird. In the mid-late 90s, metal was really acknowledged by the mainstream in a way that was unprecedented.
Number 9.
Down like some sweet gravity. Sneak behind me, this is what my damage could have been. My blood before me begs me, open up my heart again.
When I was a little kid, I remember seeing Tool videos on MTV sometimes, and the first time I saw a Tool video, I somehow knew that it was Tool before I ever even saw the information of the song pop up in the corner of the screen. I mean, it only makes sense that a band with a weird-ass name like Tool would be making weird-ass claymation music videos, right? Many years later, in high school, I remember a lot of kids around me were listening to Tool and wearing the t-shirts, and so finally a friend of mine made a cassette for me of Enema. I thought it was alright. I didn't get totally into it at first. It took me a really long time. At first I thought the songs were a little too long. It was a really slow and steady burn, but eventually I started listening to the album every day and I got really familiar with all the songs, and even the weird segue tracks got ingrained into my brain. And I had it on cassette, so I couldn't really skip those tracks anyway. Then I started paying attention to the lyrics, looking up the song meanings, and then I started finding out information about the band and seeing pictures of Maynard James Keenan wearing weird kabuki masks and dresses on stage. They didn't just influence me musically, they got me to start thinking about philosophy from a relatively young age. After that era, I did get a little weary of Tool and their fans. Their fans were just a little too much for me. It's like everybody knew somebody who would wear Tool t-shirts every day and talk about them like they were the most complex, heaviest band ever. But they really weren't. But still, the cryptic messages and mystery, the soundscapes, and the way the tracklist flows from song to song makes Enema one of the most musically compelling albums of all time.
I should have cried then. As the walls come down, and as I look in your eyes, my fear begins to fade. I'm calling all of the times I have.
Number 8.
Trust no one.
I was a fan fan of Radiohead from way back in the day when the hit single Creep was on MTV's Buzzbin. And even though I was only a child, I felt like a proud father as I watched Radiohead grow up and mature over the years, accumulating more critical acclaim and hype and success. Radiohead to me was that cool band that only I was into, because nobody else could appreciate how deep their music was because they were listening to inferior music. Which, by the way, is not a good mindset to have. Don't do that. I mean, there wasn't really a scene for Radiohead, you know? They were just kind of the random band in a sea of alternative bands coming out in the early mid-90s. And then when OK Computer came out, suddenly the whole world was in on the secret. I will admit it was a little bit of a slow burn for me as well, the album OK Computer. But I knew it was good. I knew there was a lot of depth there. So really it took me a while to take it all in. Paranoid Android might be the most epic song for a whole generation, and the video is amazing too. The whole album cemented Radiohead as legends, geniuses. And what was even crazier was that somehow when Kid A came out, they had done it again. Arguments could be made about which album is the best, The Bends, OK Computer, or Kid A. I could understand any one of those albums being Radiohead's best, so me personally, I'll just give it to OK Computer. Unfortunately for me, very similar to Tool, the fan base of Radiohead got a little bit too much for me, and I kind of drifted away from them over the years. I probably don't listen to them as much as I should these days, but I can't deny the impact that this album had on me and the rest of the world.
Number 7.
This album is totally me. This album represents where I come from in terms of sound and style. This is one of the first bands I ever heard to blend melodic singing with heavy screams. I remember the first time I heard Deftones, a friend of mine bought this album and he played it for me and told me, yeah, they kind of sound like Tool. And I listened to it and I thought, yeah, they kind of sound like Tool. Well, obviously they sound nothing like Tool, but at that time, there wasn't really anything to use as a reference. Listen. The song Be Quiet and Drive changed my life. And the guitar riff from My Own Summer, that's one of the best guitar riffs ever written. What really got me to pay attention, though, was the chords and the vibes from Mascara. It was their style, the song titles and lyrics, the mysterious album art. That's what really spoke to me. I felt like that album was about me and my group of friends, or that somehow I knew Deftones and we all chilled with the same people, and that album is about like our life. Around the Fur is the sound of my teenage years. To me, it's the perfect blend of heaviness and melody.
Number 6.
This is it. This is that secret weapon, that hidden gem that you can show off to all your friends. Failure is relatively unknown, and yet their album Fantastic Planet is one of the greatest albums ever written. A lot of people describe them as being like Nirvana, but better. Hey, I didn't say that. They did, not me. There was one famous musician, I honestly can't remember who it was, but in an interview he said something like, if Nirvana is a square, then Failure is like a decahedron or something. And I think you get it. If you've never heard Failure before and you listen to the whole album, every track is strong, and it's a really long album too. The mixing is really good. It's got that warm analog feel, but it's still really clear. The guitars are thick and grungy. The songwriting, the riffs, and the chord progressions, they're all really next level. The lyrics seem like love songs until you dig deeper and you realize the songs are really about drug addiction. This album has flown under the radar for the majority of its lifespan, but its influence can be felt in the artists that came after. If you're familiar with the other bands on this list and you like 90s alternative rock and you've never heard this album before, you are in for a treat. Go and listen to it.
Number 5.
The Blue Album influenced an entire emo generation, and Weezer isn't even emo. It's hard to imagine this now, but back in the day, people used to make fun of Weezer's band name all the time. It is a silly band name if you think about it, but you don't really notice it because Weezer has become such a household name. I mean, they had so many hits on this record, and the videos would constantly be on MTV all the time, every day. I remember seeing the music video for Buddy Holly as a little kid. It would come on all the time, and I remember thinking it was real, and I was kind of confused because Happy Days is an older show, but Weezer is a newer band, and my timelines were all mixed up and I was confused, and I really wanted to see that original episode of Happy Days where Weezer guest stars. Anyway, listen to the whole album and just think about how many good hooks are on it, how every song is catchy and memorable, how raw and heavy the distortion is, and how perfect it sounds as it lays on top of this very subtle groove on the drums. How the heaviness, juxtaposed with the falsetto harmonies and nods to doo-wop, nerd culture, X-Men, surfing, all define the spirit of what the 90s were. A reimagining and inversion of the classics, the culture that came before from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The Blue Album is one of the strongest albums of all time.
Number 4.
Back in the 90s, I noticed everyone had this CD in their CD case. Didn't matter if you were punk or a metalhead or into pop music or rap music, you had the Downward Spiral in your CD case. Probably because you liked the song Closer. Think about how huge the song Closer was. It was on MTV and radio like every day. And it's not a commercially friendly song by any means. It's just a really good song. And that was pop music in the 90s. Closer was pop music. Nine Inch Nails influenced everything, and The Downward Spiral is their best album. Structurally and thematically, it is one of the most impactful concept albums of all time. It's even got a melodic motif that shows up in the album a couple times, particularly on the end of the song Closer, or in the title track, The Downward Spiral. And I mean, if you're talking about industrial music, you can't get any better than The Downward Spiral. It's heavy without necessarily being metal, and their logo is really cool, and if you wear it, it makes you look cool. Trent Reznor is the master. He is the master at creating and choosing sounds and textures to evoke emotion and atmosphere. And you can always tell it's him when you hear his melodies and his choice of notes. It's very subtle, but it is his trademark sound. Nine Inch Nails is a lot of people's favorite band, and I get why.
Number 3.
One baby, two, another says I'm lucky to meet you. I don't care what you think, this is about me. It is now my duty to.
Some of you may be wondering, why is this number 3? Why isn't it number 1? And I get that. This is arguably the most important album of the 90s generation. For me, compiling this list, I had to strike a balance between personal nostalgia and objectivity. I actually really hated Nirvana when I was a little kid. To me, they just sounded generic and boring. And because I was a little kid, I couldn't fathom the context behind Nirvana's sudden rise to stardom. I couldn't understand that Nirvana had created this new trend that destroyed all the trends that came before. To me, Nirvana was just the popular band that everybody likes, and all the other bands try to sound like Nirvana. It wasn't until much, much later, I was in my 20s and I was just smoking. I was smoking alone in my apartment, just thinking about random crap, and out of nowhere, just totally randomly, two thoughts popped into my head. One was, Nirvana was the biggest band in the world. My jaw dropped at the sudden realization, like I had never heard that before. And my second thought was, Kurt Cobain killed himself. My jaw dropped even lower. My mind was completely blown. Not only did he kill himself, but he did it at the height of his fame. I mean, what a story. It sounds like a Hollywood movie, but it's not. It really happened. And of course, I had known all this for years. Everyone had known all this for years, but for some reason on that day, everything just clicked for me, and I realized the significance of Nirvana just out of nowhere. I went back and I listened to Nevermind, and I heard it as though I had never heard it before. I heard it the way millions and millions of people must have heard it back when it came out in 1991. And ever since that day, I finally understood. It's freaking insane how good Nirvana is, and it's insane how good Nevermind is.
Number 2.
He will deflower the freshest crop, dry up all the wounds with his rock and roll saws. Rock and roll saws. Rock and roll saws. That is what he is, he does what he plays with things that he has never gonna see, what you're never gonna be.
Manson completely changed my life. I first heard him when Sweet Dreams came out, and I wasn't into it. It really freaked me out as a little kid, but a friend of mine had the Smells Like Children EP, and we'd listen to it together, laugh at all the weird song titles, and very slowly I got into it. And then Antichrist Superstar came out and started causing a ruckus. My friend had that CD as well, and I was scared but curious. I was actually kind of religious at that time, so for some reason in my mind, owning the CD felt wrong. But if my friend made a copy for me on cassette, then that was okay. And then I ended up listening to it every single day until eventually I knew every offensive lyric to every blasphemous song. Listen. I shouldn't have to explain with words and logic why Marilyn Manson is awesome. It's self-evident. It's obvious. Just look at him. He's freaking awesome. I mean, if you see Manson from the Antichrist era and you see his music videos and you listen to the album and you don't think he's awesome, then you're the weird one. And I'm not gonna sit next to you on the bus or at the lunch table like you're the one who freaks me out. I mean, there were Christian protesters at his shows trying to shut him down. As a kid, I'd see that and I'd think, man, that band has to be awesome. Like, that's freaking crazy. I have to listen to that now. Antichrist Superstar is Marilyn Manson's best album. I know some people might make some arguments like, well, what about this album and that album, blah, blah, blah. No. Antichrist is Marilyn Manson's best album. It's a fact. It's a masterpiece. You've got Trent Reznor producing it, and it's the last album with Daisy Berkowitz playing guitar and writing some of the riffs. This is the best era of Manson. Go and listen to it.
Number 1.
Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness by the Smashing Pumpkins is my number 1 album of all time. It's got everything. Love songs, heavy songs, electronic songs, dark songs, acoustic songs, crazy songs. It's a double concept album about the cycle of life and death. And the singles defined an era. It was those middle years of the 90s, which I think were the best era of the 90s. It was those years after Kurt Cobain died and music was going to a new place, but nobody was quite sure where yet. And in that transitional period, some of the best music ever made came out. And that's where Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness comes into play. It was the 3rd album that I ever owned in my entire life, and to this day, I still regularly listen to it. I relate to this album so much because it's got such a diverse array of genres and sounds and styles, but it's still rooted in alternative rock. And I'm kind of the same way in terms of my personality or my musical tastes. I actually got the tab book for this when I was really young, and it's literally how I learned how to play guitar. It's got every guitar technique that you'd ever really need. It's all on this album. A friend of mine argued that Siamese Dream was a better album than Melancholy. He was saying how while both albums had good songs, Siamese Dream just worked better as an album as a whole. It was a more solid album. And I actually think that's a good argument. I understand where he's coming from. It's true, Siamese Dream is a really solid album. But that's exactly the reason why I think Melancholy is better than Siamese Dream, because it's more than just an album. It's an epic tale. It's a cinematic universe. This album basically got me into music, and it's the soundtrack of my life. And that's why it's number one on my very personal, very subjective list of the top 25 albums of the 90s. And there you have it. That's all I got. I thought really long and hard about making this list. At first, I was going to do a top 10, and then it just kept getting more and more until I settled on 25. So what are your top 25 albums of the 1990s? Let me know down in the comments below, or check me out live. I'm streaming on YouTube and Twitch. I stream a lot of video games, so drop on in, say hello, and let me know what your top 25 albums of the 1990s are. And let me know if you'd be interested in seeing more content like this. I usually do reaction videos to bands or genres that I'm not normally into. A lot of my album reactions can get very contentious, but I thought I'd try making a video like this just to see what happens. I'm thinking about doing some other kinds of videos too, like other top lists, or maybe some small retrospective documentary style videos on albums, or maybe some analysis of albums song by song. Just running some ideas through my head. So if there's something that you would be interested in seeing me cover, let me know. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.